There's a debate happening in Cleveland media circles right now about whether Shedeur Sanders or Deshaun Watson gives the Browns a better chance to win in 2026, and I want to engage with it directly because the disconnect between what some analysts are arguing and what the actual evidence shows has become genuinely hard to ignore. One side of this debate keeps reaching back to Houston, to 2019 and 2020. To a version of Deshaun Watson that existed before 2 Achilles ruptures and a shoulder injury that has been described internally in terms suggesting something more serious than routine recovery concern. The other side is pointing at what's happening inside that Cleveland facility right now, today, in real time. Those are not the same conversation, and I think it's worth being very precise about why they're not. Let me start with what minicamp actually showed because the facts here are more revealing than most of the debate surrounding them. Shedeur was out there operating in Munkin's system with a comfort level and a decisiveness that you simply cannot manufacture without genuine preparation behind it. The reports from inside that facility tell a specific story. He has been in that building all winter, in the coach's office, in the meeting rooms, in the film sessions, absorbing the playbook while others were not present, not engaged, not treating the off-season as the competitive opportunity it represents for someone fighting to establish himself at this level. And that preparation showed in a very specific way on the field. When you watch him move through his reads, the process doesn't look like searching. It looks like confirming. He knows where the ball is going before the snap and is using the post-snap coverage picture to ratify what the pre-snap read already told him. That's what genuine system familiarity produces. And the gap between that kind of preparation and what the other quarterbacks in that room have been doing is not a minor footnote, it's the entire story. Gabriel was out there too, and I want to give him fair treatment because the picture of what he showed is more layered than a surface summary captures. The reports describe interceptions, body language that didn't project the settled confidence of a player who believes this competition is genuinely his to win. And when you place that against the backdrop of everything circulating around his situation, the reports about his absence from Cleveland during the offseason, the suggestion that he's expressed interest in moving on, the way he looked on that field starts making a kind of sense that goes beyond football mechanics. A player who has privately concluded that his future isn't here doesn't bring the same competitive energy to a practice field that he would if he believed the opportunity was genuinely open. He had some moments. He showed some things, but the overall picture wasn't a player who had spent the winter fighting for this job. It looked like a player who had already processed the reality and was moving through the formal motions of a competition that everyone inside that building understands has already been informally decided. Now, let me get to the part of this media conversation that I genuinely cannot get past, because it has been bothering me throughout this entire minicamp cycle. There are analysts currently building the case for Deshaun Watson by referencing what he was in Houston, and I want to be honest. I understand the impulse completely, because that player was genuinely exceptional. The creativity in broken pockets, the mobility that extended plays beyond what the design allowed, the arm talent that could threaten every level of the field from a clean pocket or a scramble. In his best seasons, Watson was as good as almost anyone in professional football. Nobody who watched him in 2020 would argue otherwise. But here's the question I keep returning to. Where is the evidence that any meaningful portion of that player still exists? Not where is the hope. Not where is the projection based on memory. Where is the actual current present tense evidence that the qualities that made Watson exceptional are still available to be deployed in 2026? Because the coaching staff building game plans around Watson needs to answer that question. The front office making decisions about organizational direction needs to answer that question. And the answer, based on everything that has been communicated from inside that facility, is that the evidence doesn't currently exist in a form that allows the coaching staff to build around his availability with any reasonable confidence. The argument for Watson usually takes a specific shape. His ceiling, even in speculation, is higher than Shedeur's proven ceiling, so the potential upside of recovery outweighs the risk of building around an unproven young quarterback. On its surface, that argument has a structural logic, but it collapses the moment you examine what Watson's ceiling was actually built on. His peak value as a quarterback was inseparable from movement, from the ability to escape pressure with his legs, extend plays beyond their design, create from chaos in ways that required a functional and explosive lower body. 2 Achilles ruptures specifically and measurably threaten exactly those qualities, not theoretically, in documented, physiologically specific ways that the medical community understands clearly. When you cite Watson's peak mobility as the basis for projecting his future value while knowing the injuries he has sustained target mobility most directly, you're not making a football argument. You're making a hope argument dressed in football language. Those are different things, and the circumstances around Shedeur's actual performance need more honest examination than they've been getting. He went 3-4 without first-team reps. He was the only Browns quarterback to throw for over 400 yards in a game. He made the Pro Bowl. Every time those facts get cited in the debate, they immediately get buried under qualifications. Small sample, interceptions, rough stretches, all of that is accurate. But watch how those same analytical tools get applied to the Watson era. Multiple seasons, significant sample, results that were comprehensively below the organizational investment. The scrutiny that gets applied to Shedeur's 7 starts is simply not the same scrutiny that gets applied to Watson's much larger and much more disappointing Cleveland sample. That asymmetry tells you something about how pedigree and prior reputation shape evaluation in ways that honest analysis should resist rather than accommodate. What the minicamp conversation clarified for me is that the Watson versus Shedeur debate has become a proxy for something deeper, a fundamental disagreement about how to evaluate quarterback situations. One camp is looking at Watson's past and calculating whether enough of what he was can be recovered to justify continued organizational investment in that direction. The other camp, the one that includes the actual coaching staff, the actual locker room, and by every available indicator, the actual front office, is looking at what is being demonstrated right now, daily, in that facility, and making evaluations based on present tense evidence rather than historical projection. And in professional football, the teams that win are almost always the ones operating in the present tense. The evidence of where this organization actually stands is visible in multiple simultaneous signals, and I think their convergence matters more than any single one of them in isolation. Monken saying publicly that rep distribution will not be equal. The minicamp structure placing Shedeur with the first group while Watson worked with the third unit. Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward making public statements about their quarterback. Named statements attached to their identities, not anonymous impressions. Shedeur's 80% completion rate in 11 on 11 reps on day 1. The camera on the helmet approach Monken has implemented to develop a real diagnostic of how Shedeur processes coverages in real time. None of those things in isolation constitutes a formal announcement. All of them together constitute an organizational direction that has been communicated in the language football people actually speak. And after practice, Shedeur himself addressed the media and said something that I think deserves real engagement. He asked the people covering this team and this quarterback battle to redirect critical energy toward actually supporting the team. That's not a complaint about negative coverage. That's a challenge. It's a quarterback pointing at the work he has done and the results that work has produced and asking the people on the outside to look at the evidence honestly and respond accordingly. That's a specific kind of confidence, the kind that can only be expressed authentically by someone who has already done the thing he's asking others to believe in. Andrew Berry's communication through the draft period added texture to the organizational picture that I think deserves careful reading. He is one of the more precise communicators in NFL front office circles. His answers are characteristically careful without being evasive, and the things he doesn't say carry meaning alongside the things he does. The flexibility he described around draft strategy, multiple genuine paths at pick 6, openness to trading down for volume, willingness to consider veteran additions at receiver after the draft closes, describes an organization operating from genuine optionality rather than desperate constraint. Cleveland has 2 first-round picks, cap flexibility, and a young quarterback whose development accelerates in direct proportion to the quality of the environment built around him. When organizations make decisions from that kind of platform, the decisions tend to reflect actual conviction. Berry's openness to veteran receiver additions, Hill, Diggs, Hopkins circulating in the conversation, suggests the front office understands that giving Shedeur genuine weapons isn't optional to the developmental process. It's central to it. The Carnell Tate conversation at pick 6 keeps coming back for good reason, and the reason is schematic fit. Monken's system specifically wants receivers who can operate across the full route tree. Size, physicality, and speed existing in combination rather than in isolation. Receivers who create separation at multiple levels rather than specializing in one part of the field. Tate's profile fits that description specifically enough that the connection makes football sense rather than just mock draft sense. Whether he's actually available at 6 depends on a board that nobody can fully predict, but the fit is genuine and the organizational interest appears to be real rather than manufactured. The offensive line picture is more optimistic than the simple need-filling framing suggests. Berry's comments about the free agent investments in the trenches, Howard, Johnson, Jenkins, suggest Cleveland believes it has built a functional protection structure rather than an emergency patch. That assessment, if accurate, changes the draft calculus at 6 in ways that open possibilities the pure needs-based approach would close off. If the tackle class has the depth at 24 or 30 that Barry's comments imply he believes it has, taking the best available player at 6, regardless of position, becomes the correct organizational philosophy rather than the luxury option. What I keep coming back to at the end of this entire conversation is something about the texture of what's happening in Cleveland that feels genuinely different from the previous quarterback situations this franchise has attempted to build around. And I want to be honest that I've been watching this franchise long enough to know that different has been promised before and not delivered. So I'm not making a guarantee, I'm making an observation. The observation is that every indicator of organizational direction, how the coaching staff structures practice, how the locker room speaks publicly, how the front office describes its philosophy, how the player himself conducts himself in the building and in front of the media, is pointing consistently at the same conclusion. That consistency, maintained across multiple months and multiple evaluation contexts and multiple opportunities for something to fracture or contradict, is the strongest available evidence that this situation is what it appears to be. Shedeur Sanders spent the winter in that building when others weren't. He attended voluntary sessions when attendance was genuinely optional and others didn't show. He walked into minicamp having absorbed the offense at a level that showed up as 80% completion rate in live 11-on-11 reps on day 1. He addressed the media with the directness and confidence of a quarterback who has done the work and is no longer interested in managing other people's doubts. The Watson debate will continue in the media because the financial investment is too large and the history is too compelling for it to simply disappear. But inside the Cleveland Browns facility, in the rep distribution and the helmet cameras and the locker room testimony and the coaching staff signals, the conversation has moved considerably past that debate. What it has moved toward is a young quarterback who arrived, stayed, prepared, and has been demonstrating every day since that the position in the draft where his name was called says nothing meaningful about the player he actually is.